So in this tutorial, I want to create this effect in Photoshop. We're going to start with this image I got off Shutterstock, and we're going to see how close we can get to this image here. So let's go ahead and just put these two side by side for starters. And let's go ahead and drag this in here. And I'm going to change the opacity of it. So I'm going to hit 5 on the keyboard, and then Command T to transform. I'm just going to kind of match the eye size here. So I'm lining up the eye, and I can also move my anchor point. So when I scale it, it scales with that as the point that it's scaling from. So let's line up the mouth and the nose. So that's pretty good right there, about there. All right, so let's go ahead and commit that. And right now I don't want to crop this image quite yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Command and just click on our mummy layer, and then create a new layer, inverse my selection, and let's just fill that with a gray color. So there you can see that's about our crop right there. Now if we turn on our mummy layer, put it back to 100%, which I can do by hitting 0 on the keyboard. Let's move it to the side here. And I'm going to hit F to go into full screen mode. Now I can just zoom these two in and get a better look at the two side by side. So I'm going to move, so this is essentially my crop. So I'm going to go ahead and call that crop and select both of these layers at the same time and just move it a little bit over so it matches a bit better. And that's pretty good right there. Now we have a very similar crop between the two images. Now the next thing I'm going to do is in this image we have this hair here that's kind of running across our face, and I don't want that, so we're going to just go ahead and get rid of that. To do that, I'm going to go on the healing brush and make my brush smaller by going on the left bracket tool and just selecting here and kind of running down the hair there like that. And let's do it here too. And let's do it here as well. I'm holding Option to select what area I'm going to copy from. So there you go. We've now gotten rid of the hair. It's a little bit in here. Now here I'm just going to go ahead and use the regular stamp tool, which is S on your keyboard. I'm going to make the brush significantly smaller. Select this area of the iris and just paint right there. And let's do even smaller and get this area here. So there you go. We've now gotten rid of that hair. Next thing we're going to do is some color matching. For the color matching, I'm going to turn on my other layers so I can see how I'm doing on my color matching. And let's start with a curve layer. And the nice thing about this is I have both of them up, so I can see how well I'm matching to this one as I do my curve. So let's go ahead and just bring the overall curve down quite a bit. Now you can see it's way too saturated. So let's go ahead and add a black and white layer. And let's take the opacity down on that. So I do want just a tiny bit of that skin tone coming in. And now I'm going to go to color balance, and let's bring a lot of cyan in here. And some blue as well. Yeah, we're starting to look a lot more similar to this image here. Let's go to our shadows, bring in more cyan and more blue there. And let's add one more curve layer. And in this curve layer, I want to target more specific areas. So here you can see we're quite a bit lighter than we are here. And also it doesn't have as much magenta and yellow. So let's go to blue, because the opposite of blue is yellow. Let's click on this little hand here so we're targeting a very specific area. And let's bring it up so we're getting rid of that blue. And let's go to red and take that down in this area. There you go. We can start to see we're getting more similar color here. So that's pretty good. Now I don't want all these layers. So what I'm going to do, so let's put all these into a group. So I'm going to select them all and do Command G. And let's add a mask to that. And what I want to do is I want to, because we have a little more color in the eye area. So let's go ahead and just, let's see which of these I want to turn off. So probably the black and white, but I don't want it all the way. So let's take the opacity down to like 13, and we can always hit it more than once. There you go. We're getting a little more of that color back in there now. And just a little color in her nose area there. That looks pretty good. And a little more color there. So we've done quite a good job here now matching in terms of the two images. Now this image does have these much darker areas here and also darker here. We're going to do that with just some gradients. So I'm going to hit G for gradient. I'm going to select this color here, which seems to be a black. So let's go ahead and just add a black gradient here. Now we are seeing just a touch of that gel line there. So I'm going to take the opacity down on this just a bit. There you go. And let's add one more layer. And with a soft brush, and my opacity is still at 13, I am just going to paint in some darkness here. I'm doing this on a new layer because I may change the blending mode on this layer. Let's turn the opacity on the brush up. So if you're on a brush, if you hit any of the number keys, it's going to change the opacity of the brush. There you go. We're getting some more of that sinister shadow. Let's do a radial gradient. Just bring in a little bit more there as well. Now let's try this on multiply. That's pretty good right there. Okay, good. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to bring in some more detail into this eye, because you can see in here we've got this super detailed eye. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and copy the background layer. I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Let's just zoom into this eye here. I'm holding spacebar and Command to bring up my magnifying glass. And let's increase the clarity a lot. So there you go. That's bringing some of that detail in there. And let's also go to sharpening and increase our sharpening. I'm just moving these sliders around to see what effect it's having there. And that looks quite good. So let's hit OK there. That's kind of helped our whole image actually. So I may just keep that as a layer. Let's take the opacity down just a bit. And that's quite good there. Now I want to change the eye color to be this more brown color. Now you'll notice here that it goes kind of from a lighter yellowish brown to a more reddish brown. And we're going to use the color that's already in the eye to help create that effect. So let's go ahead, and I'm selecting the circle mark key tool. I'm going to about the center of the eye, and then as I'm dragging, I'm holding Shift and then Option. And there you go. And then I can move that selection around. So that's hitting pretty much just where I want the eye to be. Now, you'll notice that the edge of the eye is a bit faded or blurred. So what I'm going to do to blur my selection, I can do it a few ways. I can go to Select, Modify, and Feather, but then I can't really see what effect it's having. So I'm going to hit Q instead, which is going to bring up a quick mask. I'm going to go to Channels, double click on the quick mask, and take the opacity down to, let's say 50. There you go. Now I can see a little bit better there. Now I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Take the radius down, and now I can see how feathered that is becoming, and I can see it against the image. So it looks like about 3.5 is where I want it. And let's go on a brush tool, change our brush size, and then I want to paint out the top part of the eye. So we're really just getting that part of the eye that I want to grab. So right there. Okay, now I can hit Q again. And in this, I'm going to go Command J to copy that out of that layer. Let's increase the opacity to 100. And let's do a curve on that and make it a little bit brighter. Like that. And then I'm going to go Command U to bring up my hue shift. And let's just move that hue around and see if we can get that kind of orangey color. And we're not getting much, so... But there, it's a little warmer. Then let's go Command B for color balance. And let's add some red and yellow to there. And I want the highlights to have more of the yellow, and I want the shadows to have more of the red. Right about there. Let's hit OK. We're getting a similar color. Now obviously these are different eyes, so it's not going to be an exact match, but it's good enough for our purposes. Now you also notice that this is smaller, or sorry, this is smaller than this. And because we want 2 in here, I may want to make that a bit smaller. Now the nice thing is I have it as a separate layer. So what I can do is I can turn this layer off, go in here, and basically I want to push my eye in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on our background, but I'm going to make a copy just in case I do something I regret later. I'm going to make a selection just around the eye area. And I'm going to go to Filter, Liquify. Now by making that selection first, you'll see that my Liquify is just bringing up the eye. And that's good because otherwise it's going to bring up the whole image, and that's going to be a bit harder to work with. So let's, I'm on the push around or forward warp. Just going to make my brush smaller and just push in the eye. Actually, I want it a little bit bigger. There you go. I can adjust the brush on the fly using my bracket up and down. Now I'm not worrying about what's happening to this because, like I said, I have that already on a separate layer. So there you go, that looks pretty good. Let's hit OK. Now if we turn that layer back on, you'll see we can actually make this a bit smaller. I want to make it smaller from there, and let's go to about there. Now one issue is because this is 69%, we're getting the bleed through of the eye underneath. So what we'll have to do is make one more copy of this, make it 100%, and put a mask on it. And I'm holding Option when I click on the mask so that the mask is black. And then I'm going to paint just around this edge here on my mask. So let's put my brush to 100. I want my foreground color to be white, so I want these switched. So I can hit X to switch those, and then just paint out that eye there. So there you go. I now have that. Alright, so now let's make the second pupil. So this is a highlight, and it's a highlight on the whole eye, not on the pupil. So it wouldn't make sense for there to be another highlight on the second pupil. So let's go ahead and make a copy of this. Let's call this pupil, or eye center. And let's go ahead and make a copy of that later. So I'm going to do Command J, and then let's move that over here, make it a bit smaller. And that looks pretty good there. Now what I want to do is get rid of this. So to do that, I'm going to make one more copy of it. Go Command T for transform and flip horizontal. And just turn it a bit so it's covering this area. Put a mask on there and just paint this area in like that. So there you go. Now I can merge those two, which is Command E with both layers selected. Put another mask on there and just paint out this area of the mask where the two eyes are coming together. Make a smaller brush and kind of merge these two. There you go. So we now have that effect of two pupils. Now the shadow in this part of the eye should be a bit stronger. So what I'm going to do, because you can see in the layer below there's shadow coming in here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a layer, clip mask it to that layer below by holding Option and clicking between the two layers, going on a big soft brush, selecting the shadow color here and just hitting it like one time. There you go. That looks quite good. Actually, it looks more realistic than this one. Now, let's see if we can add these figure marks here onto the face. Now, this highlight here is a little bit stronger in this image, so I can adjust that by making another layer, and let's call this highlights. Let's make that brush white, relatively big, and pretty low opacity, and just kind of paint a highlight there. And on the bridge of the nose here. And just on this part of the lip here. There you go. Yeah, that's a little too strong. So I'm going to go E for erase. Take down the hardness. Take down the opacity. Just there you go. Alright, now I'm going to put this layer on overlay. So it kind of blends in a little, and take the opacity down just a bit. So there you go. That looks pretty good. We also need to darken these lips. So let's do a darken layer. And for this, I'm going to again go on my brush tool, B, make a bigger brush, and just hit that with some black. I actually want to put that under all my color adjustments so that it's getting that blue shadow. And then we can take the opacity down. There you go. Alright, that looks pretty good. Alright, so now we want to create these kind of rune symbols or what have you. Now, rather than copying these, I'm going to go ahead and make my own. So let's add another layer here, and let's call these rune marks, and go on a brush, and in this case I want this brush here. Let's make it about the width of these so we can do that interactively, probably a little more easily. So let's just take it down. There you go. Let's take the opacity on our brush to 100, and let's move that layer above everything just so we can see how it looks. So that looks pretty good, but obviously you can see the end of the brush is circular. Now if I were using a Wacom or a tablet, I could, you know, paint these more realistically, but in this case I'm doing it just with the mouse. So what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to brush them, I'm actually going to use the lasso, make some selections in film. So I'm going to do Command A, delete, Command D to deselect, And I'm just gonna, actually I'm gonna use my pen tool, just have a little more control there. And I'm just gonna create a path. And let's start with kind of a Z shape. Actually, let's make a shape. And yeah, because I started the path not as a shape, I need to start the path again. So let's do that. And I don't want any stroke, I just want a black fill. So there you go. And then I want kind of an E shape. But I'm going to do it kind of in the style of this. So rather than being a full E, it's just going to be 3 lines. And I can temporarily switch to my arrow tool by holding down Command, and then I can move anchor points around. And by holding down Command, I can select a layer. So there you go, that's pretty good. And then I want to do kind of a V shape. I'm doing like a Zevin design here. So let's go back on the pen tool, which is P on your keyboard. Let's do our V shape. There you go. And let's do one more E shape. And finally, let's make like an N shape. And that looks pretty good. The Z is probably a bit too big. So I'm hitting V to go back on my move, on my move tool. So let's grab all these and let's put them on her face and see how they're looking there. So overall the whole thing needs to be a bit bigger, so I'm doing Command T. I want it to go to about there. This E feels a bit too big. So I'm holding down Command and then Shift and Command to select those 3. That's pretty good there. Let's adjust the shape of this just a bit. Good. And for the last 3, I kind of want to do a fake D, S, G, N for design. So let's go back on our pen tool. And I'm going to do kind of a D that looks like, you know, a bit like that. And then an S. So let's make kind of an interesting S shape. And then for the G, yeah, almost something like that, but the other way would be an interesting G shape. And then finally an N. There you go. So let's take those. That one, that one, that one, that one. Let's move these over. Yeah, those look pretty good. Okay, so we now have those. Now we want to create this kind of effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these rune marks and I'm going to convert them to a smart object. There you go. Now, let's kind of study these a little. So they have this bleed out of color. They also have skin texture on them, and they also have this very chiseled beveled look. So let's see if we can achieve those things. So first, let's go ahead and make a copy of our smart object, and let's go ahead and blur that copy so we get that kind of bleed out effect. It seems like we want to blur it quite a bit, about there. And let's go ahead and put a color overlay on that. Actually, let's see what happens if we put it underneath there. So that's giving us the right color, but let's take down the opacity. So there you go. We now just have that kind of color bleed out that we're seeing around these. Okay, so now back onto this. Let's put a bevel effect on here. And I want to do an inner bevel, but I want it to be, rather than smooth, I want it to be chisel hard, and I want the size to go all the way to the middle, similar to this. And our lighting seems pretty good. This is mostly lit from the top and the left side, so let's move our light so that it's hitting the top and the left side. So if we look at, for example, this one for comparison, we got there and there, so maybe a little higher. Yeah, that seems about right. Okay. And now what I want to do is let's play with some blending modes. So let's try it on overlay first. Now, that didn't do anything, and part of the problem is this bevel effect is not going to be blended with overlay because it's sitting on top. So what we can do is convert this to a new smart object. And now you'll see the overlay effect is applying to the bevels as well. Let's take the opacity down on that. Still definitely not getting the same realism as here. So let's try something else here. Let's go back on 100. Let's put this on normal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer, fill it with black. So now I'm just seeing the highlights. So now if I go to channels and hold down Command and select that, what I've selected is just the highlights. So now if I go ahead and make a curves layer and just bring that up, you'll see I'm bringing up the highlights, but I'm bringing it up in the skin itself. So like that. There you go. Let's try putting this on overlay and doubling it up. There you go. And now I'm going to do the same thing, except for this time I want to select the dark areas. So I'm going to switch my background layer to white. So Command Delete fills with my background color, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of these two. So Shift Option Command E, and then I'm going to curve that so that these areas are white. So because I just want the shadow areas in my selection like that. So now let's go to channels, select that again, and in this case I want to invert the selection. Let's turn off all these layers, and then let's add another curves layer here, but in this case we want to darken. So now we're getting an effect that's more similar to this. Although obviously ours are way sharper than these. So let's adjust that, the sharpness of these edges. So let's go in this layer and go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I want to blur this, but not that much. Just a little bit, like maybe 2 pixels. And let's add that same blur to the 2 highlight layers. Now, unfortunately, we're getting like the soft effect, whereas this is quite harsh. So, how do we get that texture into here, and how do we just get those middles? So let's put this back on overlay. And in this, I want the dark areas not to be black. So let's go ahead and add a color overlay. Actually, let's add a curve. It really doesn't matter what we add. All that's important is that we get this to be more of a gray rather than a black. There you go. So let's hit that, save. There you go. So now we're seeing some of that texture. Okay, so now how do we bring the texture? Let's go to our original layer down here. I'm going to hold Option and click on the eyeball. And I'm going to go ahead, actually before I do that, I'm going to make another copy of this. And then I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter again. And what I want to do is I want to bring out as much of our skin texture here as possible. So I'm going to pump up the clarity and then pump up the sharpening quite a bit. Let's hit OK on that, and let's make a copy of that. Command J, filter, and I'm going to do it even more. So let's go custom high pass and do about 2 pixels, and then let's put that on linear light. So now we're getting a ton of texture there. That's what I want. So let's merge those two. So we're going to call this heavy skin texture for now. And let's turn all of our layers back on. Let's bring this closer to the top. Now I'm going to go into my channels and see which of these channels has the most texture. It looks like blue. So let's go ahead and Command A, Command C, go back on RGB and paste. So now I've got my blue there. And let's go to curves, and we can even pump that up some more in terms of the contrast. Okay, so now we're going to get a little more tricky. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save as, and I'm going to call this Displace PSD, and I want it as a copy without layers. I'm going to hit save. So there you go. I've now made a copy of that displace of this as a separate PSD. Now what I can do is in this layer here that we've added, or sorry, in this layer, I can go to Filter, Distort, Displace, and I just want like 2 pixels. I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to select that PSD that we did. You can see what that's done is it's used the texture of the skin to distort this smart object. So let's try it maybe 5, see what that looks like. It's a little bit better. Let's see how we're measuring up here. Not bad, not bad. It's getting closer. Still, this has far more texture in there. So let's try this. Let's go ahead and copy that. And let's put that on overlay on top. And let's curve this layer take down our whites so our highlights aren't so high. Now we're getting more texture on there. Still not as convincing as this one, unfortunately. Trying to think how else we can pull this off. Let's go to our this layer and turn the opacity down a little bit more. So let's say 44. Let's make one more copy of that. Turn off the Gaussian blur. And take the opacity down to 11, and I also want to displace this. Not quite as much, let's say 3. Good. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and make a copy of this. I'm going to go into it and I'm going to play with the colors a bit. Make it blue, and I want the shadow areas to be blue as well. So kind of like that. Let's see how that looks. A little bit better. Getting too much distortion there. Let's take our displays back down to 3. Good. Let's make sure this one's on 3 as well. Good. I'm going to go ahead and select. I'm going to do some curves just on this. So in the red, which is also the cyan, I want to take the cyan down from these highlights. But I don't want to affect the darks. It's about there. That's starting to look a bit better. Now here we can see that it has kind of these shadows underneath from where the skin is sticking out. I think that's helping it. So let's see if we can add some of those as well. So I'm going to make one more copy of this. I'm going to turn off the displace. And actually I'm just going to make a new layer and fill it with black. And I'm going to do filter, blur, motion blur. And I want the angle to kind of match the face angle like that. And rather than doing a lot, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it just a little, but then do it multiple times. So that's going to spread it out a little more evenly than trying to do it all in one. So there you go. We can now get, now I can just bump this down a bit. And then I'm going to select this layer and use that to mask out the top. So we just have the shadows at the bottom. And then I can also use the paintbrush and just get rid of the shadows that are along the top, so that we're just getting the shadows along the bottom. That's looking a little more convincing. Let's take the opacity down on that. Still a little bit too much blue in there. So let's go ahead and select, and I'm going to go ahead and just use a black and white on this. There you go. Even that helps. Alright, so there you go. We're now getting a pretty nice effect. Now I'm going to bring this eye down just a bit. This pupil, sorry. So let's go to eye center. Move that down just a bit so we're getting more of the eye in there. And let's just do a stamp tool. Just get that up there. There you go. And that looks pretty cool. Let's get a little bit more of that orange color in here. It's kind of an orangey brown. And I'm going to actually do this above all the color correction. So there you go. And then let's put that on soft light, which is Shift Option F, by the way, the shortcut for soft light. So there you go. A relatively convincing duplicate of the Mummy poster. Now, obviously, we can do a final crop. So if we select our crop layer, just go ahead and Command click on that, invert our selection. Now you can see we have the edge there selected. So what I'll do is I'll just hold Shift Option. There you go. Image crop. And voila. We have our Mummy poster. There you go. Please subscribe to my channel. If you've got any questions or any comments, leave them down below. Happy Photoshopping.